Why was she the only one not moving? The colonel's voice cut through the morning heat like a blade. Every soldier on that parade ground heard it, every single one. His words weren't just an order, they were a public execution. That hair is a disgrace to this uniform. You will report to the barber at 1400 hours and have it all shaved off. Every last strand. The laughter came in waves, quiet at first, then louder, a shared cruelty that bonded them together. They saw what the colonel wanted them to see, a woman out of line, a soldier who thought she was above the rules, someone who needed to be reminded of her place. But Sergeant Eva Rostova didn't flinch. She stood there, spine straight, eyes fixed on something far beyond the mountains shimmering in the distance. Her face revealed nothing, not anger, not shame, not even acknowledgement, just a professional calm that seemed to infuriate the colonel even more. Her hair, a thick dark braid that fell to the small of her back, was the only thing about her that didn't conform, the only detail that made her stand out in this sea of regulation and uniformity. Colonel Marcus Thorne saw it as defiance, a personal challenge to his authority. He was a man who confused volume with power, whose career had plateaued years ago, leaving him to rule this small kingdom with an iron fist of petty regulations. To him, her hair wasn't just a violation, it was an insult. But there was someone else watching that morning. General Maddox stood in the shade of the command building, observing the base inspection from a distance. When he saw her stance, that unnatural stillness, something flickered in his memory, something old, something classified. He leaned forward in his chair, a ghost from the past stirring in the back of his mind. He recognized that calm, the kind that's only forged in places where a single wrong move costs lives. Her silence was her only answer, a void more profound than any shouted protest. She lifted her hand in a crisp textbook salute. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice even, low, devoid of emotion. It was this composure that enraged the colonel most. He saw arrogance, silent mockery. He couldn't know that her silence wasn't a weapon against him. It was a shield, a discipline honed in places where words could get you killed. He couldn't know that the regulation he quoted so proudly had exceptions. Exceptions for operators returning from deep cover, for soldiers who'd spent years where blending in meant survival. He saw only a disobedient subordinate, and he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. The amusement faded into something darker, morbid anticipation. They were about to witness a public shearing, a ritual designed to reinforce the hierarchy. They saw a woman being put in her place. The general saw something else entirely. He saw a professional being tested, and he watched, breath held, to see if the steel he remembered had lost its temper. What they didn't know was that she'd been waiting for this moment. Not this humiliation, exactly, but the moment when the disguise would finally come off. The walk to the barber shop felt endless. Whispers followed her like shadows. Stares tracked her every step, but Sergeant Rostova moved through it all as if she were walking through mist, her focus internal, her presence contained. She'd walked through worse, far worse. The barber was a kid, barely out of basic training. His hands shook when she sat in the chair, the long dark braid looking almost alive against the stark white cape draped over her shoulders. "All of it, son," she said quietly, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Colonel's orders." The hum of the electric clippers filled the small shop, a mournful metallic drone. The first pass was a shock. The thick braid severed at its base, falling to the floor with a soft thud, a sacrifice to a false god of conformity. The private worked quickly, his hands trembling slightly as swaths of dark hair fell away. With each pass her features became sharper, more defined. The high cheekbones, the steady, clear eyes, the resolute set of her jaw. The hair had been a veil, softening her appearance, allowing her to seem less conspicuous. Without it she was stark geometry, her face a landscape of purpose. The other soldiers waiting for trims watched in a mixture of pity and fascination. They saw the end of a punishment. They couldn't comprehend that they were witnessing a rebirth, the stripping away of a disguise she no longer needed. She paid the private, left the braid lying on the floor, walked out into the unforgiving sun with her newly bare head held high. The heat on her scalp was strange, intimate. She felt the eyes of everyone she passed, but most of all she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years, lightness, the shedding of a role she'd played in the shadows for so long. She was no longer undercover, she was exposed. And in that exposure, a dangerous kind of freedom was beginning to stir. But there was something else, something she felt deep in her gut, a familiar tension, the kind that comes right before everything falls apart. She just didn't know it would happen so soon. The colonel saw her later that afternoon, her head gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the Tactical Operations Center. He gave a curt, satisfied nod. Matter closed. He'd asserted his dominance, enforced the rules, made an example. He'd won. He turned his attention back to the massive screens dominating the front wall. Operation Chimera's Shield, the most critical joint training exercise in 5 years. Air, sea, and land assets from 6 different nations coordinating against a sophisticated cyber and kinetic attack. The kind of complex, high-stakes war game that made or broke careers. And Colonel Thorne's career desperately needed the making. He was so focused on the grand strategy, on the movement of digital brigades and phantom fighter wings, that he failed to notice the small amber warning light blinking in the corner of the primary network status board. It was a quiet warning, a subtle sign of a gathering storm. And like the quiet sergeant he'd just humiliated, he dismissed it as utterly insignificant. What happened next would change everything. The amber light blinked for exactly 90 seconds. Then it turned solid red. A single piercing alarm cut through the low hum of the Tactical Operations Center. Not a simulated failure. A genuine catastrophic system collapse. The main screen, which moments before had displayed the intricate dance of a multinational force, dissolved into a cascade of corrupted data. A waterfall of meaningless symbols and error codes. Panic erupted, cold and sharp. Technicians shouted jargon-laced reports that all meant the same thing. They were blind. The entire network, the digital backbone of the most expensive and complex military simulation ever conceived, had been completely compromised. "What is it?" Colonel Thorne roared, his face a mask of disbelief. "Report." A young captain, the lead network engineer, turned from his console, his face pale. "Sir, it's not a hardware failure, it's a ghost. Parasitic code rooted in the core kernel. It's rewriting our source protocols from the inside out. We're locked out completely." The colonel stared, his mind struggling to process the scale of the disaster. This wasn't just a glitch. It was a decapitation. The exercise was over. His career was over. The international observers, including 4-star General Maddox, were witnessing his command crumble in real time. The room descended into chaos. Orders shouted over each other. Technicians frantically typing commands that did nothing. Nothing worked. Every firewall breached. Every backup corrupted. Every protocol overridden. They were helpless. And then cutting through the pandemonium, a voice. Calm, quiet, almost too quiet. "Sir, request permission to access the primary console." Every head turned. Sergeant Rostova stood at the back of the room, her shaved head catching the red emergency lights. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't even breathing hard. She looked like she was standing in line for coffee. The colonel's face twisted. "Sergeant, this is a network crisis. I need engineers, not—" "Colonel," General Maddox's voice cut through like thunder. He was standing now, his eyes locked on Rostova, and in his gaze was recognition, complete and absolute. "Let her work." It wasn't a suggestion. Thorne's mouth opened, closed. He stepped aside, fury and confusion warring on his face. Rostova moved to the console like she'd done it 1,000 times before, because she had. The young captain slid out of the chair, watching as she sat down, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for just a moment. Then she began to type. Not frantically, not desperately, with surgical precision. Her fingers moved across the keys like a pianist performing a concerto. Line after line of code flowed across the screen. Commands that made no sense to anyone watching. Protocols they'd never seen before. The room fell silent. Everyone watched transfixed as she worked. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. Her expression never changed. Focused, calm, like she was solving a puzzle she'd seen before, and in a way she had. This wasn't her first ghost, it wouldn't be her last. At the 4-minute mark, something shifted. The cascade of corrupted data slowed, then stopped, then, impossibly, began to reverse. A gasp rippled through the room. The main screen flickered, once, twice, then stabilized. Clean data streams replaced the chaos. System diagnostics ran green across the board. The network was breathing again. Rostova leaned back, her fingers still. She didn't celebrate, didn't smile. She simply stood, turned to the colonel, and gave a crisp salute. System restored, sir. Ghost purged and isolated for analysis. All protocols nominal. The silence that followed was deafening. Then General Maddox began to clap, slow, deliberate, and one by one every person in that room joined him, a thunderous applause that shook the walls. But there was something in the general's eyes, something that looked like grief and pride, and a deep, terrible understanding of what had just been revealed. Who was she really? Colonel Thorne stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. The woman he'd humiliated, the woman he'd publicly shamed. She'd just saved his entire operation, saved his career, saved him. General Maddox stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of command. Everyone out, now, except you, Sergeant, and you, Colonel. The room cleared in seconds. The door closed with a heavy click. The general turned to Rostova, and for the first time since this morning she looked uncertain. Not afraid, but wary, like someone who just had their cover blown in the worst possible way. Sergeant Eva Rostova, Maddox said slowly, each word deliberate. Or should I say Oracle? The colonel's eyes went wide. Oracle, the Oracle, that's a myth, a ghost story they tell in Cyber Command about some operator who spent 3 years embedded in Eastern European hacker collectives, Maddox finished. Who infiltrated the most sophisticated cyber terror networks in the world, who fed us intel that prevented 6 major attacks on NATO infrastructure, who became so good at what she did that her own side started to wonder whose side she was really on. He looked at Rostova with something close to reverence. The Oracle doesn't exist on paper, no service record, no official commendations, just results, just saves, just ghosts eliminated before they ever became threats. Rostova's jaw tightened. She said nothing, but her silence confirmed everything. The general turned to Colonel Thorne, whose face had gone ash-gray. Colonel, when an operator returns from deep cover, there are protocols, reintegration procedures, allowances for the fact that they've been living by different rules in places we can't even acknowledge exist. One of those allowances is appearance. Hair length, tattoos, scars, whatever they needed to blend in to survive, to complete the mission. His voice dropped, dangerous now. Sergeant Rostova has been back for exactly 14 days. 14 days of mandatory psych evaluations, debriefs, and reorientation. She was cleared for light duty, routine assignments, blending back into normal military life while her operational identity was officially retired. He stepped closer to Thorne. You had all of this in her file, marked classified, sealed by direct order of JSOC, and you never looked, because you were too busy playing king of your little parade ground to actually know your soldiers. The colonel had no words, no defense. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse. Maddox wasn't finished. That ghost you just witnessed her kill, that was a piece of code designed by the same people she spent 3 years living among, the same networks, the same signature. She recognized it because she helped build defenses against it. She saved this command not in spite of who she is, but because of who she is. He turned back to Rostova. Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you tell him? For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. Tired, sad. Because it wouldn't have mattered, sir. Men like him don't listen. They have to see. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. Maddox nodded slowly. You're right, and now he's seen. What came next was swift, brutal, precise. By 1800 hours, Colonel Marcus Thorne was relieved of command. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, in front of the same soldiers who'd witnessed his performance that morning. General Maddox personally read the order, his voice echoing across the parade ground. Failure to uphold the standards of this command, failure to know and protect the soldiers under his care, failure to exercise sound judgment, effective immediately. The colonel left Fort Greystone that evening, his career in ruins, his reputation shattered. He demanded respect and received humiliation. He'd wielded power and discovered it was never truly his. Maddox appointed a new commander, a younger, more thoughtful officer who'd watched the entire event unfold from the back of the room, Lieutenant Colonel Anna Sharma. Her first act was to call a full battalion formation. Sergeant Rostova stood in the ranks, her shaved head gleaming in the morning sun, indistinguishable from the other soldiers, just as she preferred. But this time the stares she received weren't mockery or pity. They were respect, pure and absolute. Sharma stood before them, her voice clear and strong. Yesterday, we were reminded of a vital lesson, a lesson about assumptions, about respect. We were reminded that the measure of a soldier is not the length of their hair or the shine on their boots, but the content of their character and the quality of their skill. She looked directly at Rostova. We are fortunate to have heroes among us. Most of them we will never know. They serve in the shadows, they sacrifice in silence, and they ask for nothing in return. Yesterday, we were given a brief glimpse of one such hero. Her voice carried across the entire formation. Sergeant Rostova, your actions saved this command from catastrophic failure. Your competence under pressure was an example to us all. On behalf of every soldier standing here, I want to offer you our deepest gratitude and our most sincere apology for the profound lack of judgment you were shown. Spontaneous applause erupted, a rolling thunder of respect that washed over the parade ground like a wave. Rostova, for her part, simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She sought no apology, required no praise. Her validation came not from words but from mission success. That was all that ever mattered. Could one person really change an entire base? In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. The culture began to shift. Officers started listening to their NCOs instead of talking over them. The focus moved from superficial inspections to meaningful, skills-based training. Competence started mattering more than compliance. The story of the sergeant and the shears did more to reform the command than 100 leadership seminars ever could. Rostova deflected the attention. She took on the role of mentor to the younger signals intelligence analysts, spending hours in the comm center, not just teaching them code, teaching them a philosophy. Don't tell them how good you are, she'd say quietly. Show them. Competence is the only currency that matters. Everything else is noise. Her shaved head began to grow back, a soft fuzz that softened her sharp features. But the legend was already carved in stone. She'd become a living part of the base's folklore. A few months later, a small, unassuming plaque appeared on the wall of the Tactical Operations Center, right next to the main network console where she'd worked her magic. It didn't bear her name. It simply read, "The Oracle's Perch. Let silence speak. Let competence reign." General Maddox had it installed personally. a quiet, permanent tribute to the quiet professional who'd reminded them all what true strength looked like. The plaque became a touchstone. Before any major operation, the lead engineer would walk over and place a hand on the cool metal, a silent ritual to invoke the spirit of calm, focused excellence that Rostova had embodied. But Sergeant Rostova herself was not there to see it. One morning she was simply gone, her bunk stripped, her locker empty, no fanfare, no farewell ceremony. Like the ghost she'd always been, she'd slipped away in the night, recalled to the shadows, to fight the wars no one would ever see. But she left a legacy in her wake. The young captain whose keyboard she'd commandeered became one of the top cyber warfare officers in the Army. Forever changed by the 4 minutes he'd spent watching a masterwork. He built a new training module based on the principles he'd learned from her. The Oracle Protocol, creative, adaptive problem-solving over rigid, by-the-book procedures. The story of her vindication became official curriculum, mandatory orientation for every new officer at Fort Greystone. Lieutenant Colonel Sharma would stand before fresh-faced lieutenants and tell them the story, ending with the same warning every time. Judge your soldiers by the content of their skills, not the conformity of their appearance. The person you underestimate today might be the only one who can save you tomorrow. The tale traveled beyond the gates of Fort Greystone, passed from soldier to soldier, base to base, until it became one of the Army's enduring modern legends. It was more than a story about a haircut. It was about the profound, unassailable power of demonstrated competence. It championed the quiet professional, the silent warrior, the individual whose worth is proven not by the volume of their voice, but by the precision of their actions. It was a testament to the idea that respect is not a right of rank to be demanded, but a privilege of skill to be earned. Years passed. Fort Greystone became a center of excellence for cyber command, its reputation built on the foundations of that cultural shift. Colonel Thorne's name was long forgotten, a footnote in a dusty archive. But the name Oracle was whispered with reverence. The story was told to new recruits not as a recent event, but as a foundational myth, like the Spartans at Thermopylae. The tale of how the command learned to value substance over style, to seek out and empower the quiet professionals who formed the true backbone of the military. A new generation worked at the Oracle's perch, men and women of all backgrounds, judged not by how they looked but by what they could do. The lesson had been encoded into the base's DNA. True legacy isn't what you say or what you demand. It's what you build, what you prove, and the standards you inspire in others. Eva Rostova was never seen at Fort Greystone again. Her name remained sealed in the nation's most secret files, but her actions created a ripple effect that continued to spread long after she was gone. She'd proven that one person, armed with quiet competence and unwavering calm, could dismantle a flawed system as effectively as she could dismantle parasitic code. She'd shown them that a shaved head, intended as a mark of shame, could become a crown of honor. Her silence had spoken louder than any of Colonel Thorne's shouted orders ever could. A lasting testament to a simple, powerful truth. What you are is always more important than what you appear to be. The world is full of loud voices demanding respect they haven't earned. It's the quiet, competent hands that truly shape the future, that solve the impossible problems, that save us when everything seems lost. This story is a reminder. Look past the surface. Challenge your assumptions. Recognize the hero who might be standing right in front of you, waiting silently for the moment to act. Be the person whose work speaks for itself, whose value is self-evident, whose legacy is not written in medals or headlines, but in the quiet, continued success of the missions they made possible and the people they inspired. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.